The summer of 1940 draped Europe in a heavy silence, broken only by the crackle of wireless broadcasts and the distant drone of aircraft returning from missions over the English Channel. France had fallen with shocking speed, her cities overrun and her military defeated. Nazi flags flew from Parisian rooftops, and Hitler's Wehrmacht now stood triumphant on the western coast of Europe. Only Britain remained, a stubborn island refusing to yield. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler paced the marble corridors of the Reich Chancellery. He had hoped that Britain, seeing the hopelessness of resistance, would seek peace. But Winston Churchill, newly appointed Prime Minister, had no intention of surrendering. Britain would fight on, alone, if necessary. Frustrated and impatient, Hitler turned his gaze across the Channel. Operation Sea Lion was born from this frustration, a bold and perilous plan to invade the British Isles and crush their defiance once and for all. Winston Churchill, cigar clenched between his teeth, stood in the underground war room deep beneath Whitehall. Maps of southern England were spread across the table. RAF Fighter Command was battered, but not broken. Britain's radar stations, the critical early warning system that had turned the tide during the Battle of Britain, were under constant threat. The Royal Navy was scattered, much of it committed to protecting far-flung parts of the empire. But Churchill knew that if Germany was to land its forces on British soil, the survival of democracy might hang in the balance. Colonel Gerhard Stahl, a disciplined and calculating officer of the German Fallschirmjäger, the paratrooper corps, reviewed final mission plans with his men. Their objective: secure key airfields inland and disrupt British reinforcements. For weeks, they had trained relentlessly in France, rehearsing drops over mock English villages. Intelligence suggested British morale was fragile. A swift and brutal assault might be enough to shatter resistance. At the same time, in a modest farmhouse in Kent, 17-year-old Thomas Hargreaves listened to the BBC radio as Churchill's voice thundered across the airwaves. Tom was too young to enlist, but not too young to notice the way his mother flinched every time the sirens sounded or the skies roared with Spitfire engines. He watched from his window as sandbags were piled around the church and barbed wire threaded along the beaches. Every morning, Home Guard volunteers, many older than his father, marched through the streets, rifles slung awkwardly on shoulders. The war was no longer distant. It was coming to them. Along the French coast, a massive buildup was underway. Barges, hastily repurposed rivercraft, were fitted with ramps and armor plates. Troops packed into staging areas near Calais and Boulogne. U-boats prowled the waters, seeking Royal Navy patrols. The Luftwaffe intensified their raids, focusing on radar installations and fighter airfields in southern England. With each passing day, the illusion that Britain was impenetrable grew thinner. By early September, Goering boasted that the RAF was on its knees. In truth, British pilots were exhausted, but not defeated. Churchill's cabinet, weary and strained, faced mounting pressure. Supplies were dwindling. Coastal towns were bombed nightly. There were whispers of evacuation plans for the royal family. Yet the resolve in Churchill's speeches kept the nation galvanized. "Let them come," he declared in one address. "We shall fight them on the beaches." Then came the message that sent ripples through British command. Intercepted radio traffic indicated a massive movement of German troops and ships. The feared day had arrived. Operation Sea Lion was launching. In the dead of night, the first wave of paratroopers boarded their aircraft. Colonel Stahl looked over his men, many young, eager, believing in quick victory. As their transport planes droned into the dark, he thought not of glory, but of the unpredictability of war. Over the Channel, under cloud cover and a moonless sky, German pilots guided their formations toward designated drop zones in Sussex and Kent. Meanwhile, Royal Observer Corps volunteers scanned the skies. In a bunker outside Dover, radar operators noticed the incoming blips. The coastal defenses were alerted. The few remaining RAF squadrons scrambled to intercept. Tom Hargreaves woke to the wail of the air raid siren and the distant sound of machine gun fire. The war had arrived at his doorstep. As dawn broke over the English countryside, parachutes bloomed like deadly flowers over the fields, and German boots touched British soil. The invasion had begun. Colonel Gerhard Stahl hit the ground hard, his parachute collapsing behind him as he drew his sidearm and scanned the tree line. His boots sank into a damp English field outside Ashford, dew clinging to his uniform. Around him, his men scrambled to unclip their gear, rifles slung forward as they formed a perimeter. The radio crackled to life, reports of scattered landings and anti-aircraft fire. British defenses were more alert than expected. Within minutes, he regrouped a small platoon and advanced toward their target, a communications relay believed to coordinate RAF sorties in the region. A few miles away, the British 1st Infantry Reserves, hastily reassembled Home Guard volunteers and career soldiers, received orders to intercept. Lieutenant Rachel Moore, a former schoolteacher turned officer through necessity, checked her revolver with trembling fingers. Her unit, mostly men too old or too young for regular duty, loaded rifles with a mix of anxiety and determination. They had drilled endlessly for this moment, always with the hope it would never come. Thomas Hargreaves, swept up in the confusion, found himself helping his mother board up the windows. The church bell in the village square rang frantically. 3 short tolls. It was the signal. Airborne troops had landed nearby. Without waiting for instruction, Tom ran toward the coast, dodging through hedgerows, clutching a battered bicycle. He had no rifle, no orders, just the stubborn resolve of youth and a kitchen knife tucked in his boot. As the German paratroopers pressed forward, they met heavier resistance than they had anticipated. Farmers with shotguns, constables with pistols, even schoolboys with cricket bats emerged from hiding to defend their homes. Colonel Stahl's advance slowed. His men, trained for fast strikes and rapid capture, found themselves in an unrelenting guerrilla battlefield. Civilians fought with an intensity no German drill had prepared them for. Rachel's unit established a checkpoint on a narrow country road lined with stone fences and hedgerows. She knew they were outgunned but had the advantage of terrain. Her men crouched behind barricades, eyes fixed on the tree line. The first Germans who emerged were met with a hail of fire. Smoke filled the air. A paratrooper screamed as he fell into a ditch. The battle raged for minutes that felt like hours. By noon, Stahl's radio contact with high command had broken down. British jamming, mechanical failures, or sheer chaos, he couldn't know. His orders had been clear: take and hold key infrastructure. But holding became impossible without reinforcements. Casualties were mounting, morale thinning. He called for a retreat to a farmhouse defensible from 3 sides. Tom reached the village outskirts just in time to see a German squad approach the town square. Untrained but driven, he crouched behind a stone wall, heart pounding. His eyes darted from soldier to soldier, their black boots stamping down cobbled streets. One stopped near a red post box and lit a cigarette. Tom remembered stories of French resistance, of sabotage. Without thinking, he loosened a rock from the wall, hurled it, and ducked. The soldier shouted, startled. Shots rang out, but Tom had already vanished into the trees. That single act set off panic. Villagers, emboldened by the chaos, ambushed the patrol. Fire erupted from windows. German troops returned fire indiscriminately, trying to suppress resistance that seemed to come from every angle. Stahl's men were experienced, but they were trained for military opposition, not a town united in defiance. Elsewhere along the coast, the Royal Navy had begun responding to reports of barges crossing the channel. Destroyers steamed at full speed through the dawn mist, guns ready. They met the slow-moving German transport flotilla with thunderous broadsides. Fires blossomed on the horizon as barges exploded, their wooden hulls no match for naval firepower. Hundreds of German troops never made it ashore. By mid-afternoon, Stahl received grim news from a surviving radio operator. The landings had been repulsed in multiple sectors. Reinforcements were delayed or destroyed. Luftwaffe support was inconsistent. RAF fighters still controlled portions of the skies. The German foothold on British soil was shrinking. Lieutenant Moore led her men in a flanking maneuver, pushing the remaining German forces back toward the riverbank. Her voice, once used to reciting poetry, now commanded with clarity and urgency. Blood stained her uniform, but her spirit never faltered. She locked eyes with a wounded German soldier and motioned for him to drop his weapon. He did. She didn't shoot. Tom returned home as the sun set behind the burning treetops. His mother, tearful and silent, wrapped him in a blanket. Around the village, bodies were collected, wounded tended. The Union Jack still flew above the town hall. Colonel Stahl, captured alongside the remnants of his unit, was marched through the village under guard. His eyes, hardened by war, met those of the boy he had nearly shot in the square. Tom didn't flinch, neither did Stahl. The war, for both of them, had just changed. Rain fell in steady sheets over the craggy cliffs of Dover as British reinforcements finally secured the remaining beachheads. The sea, once a corridor of invasion, now churned with wreckage, burned out German barges, shattered crates, and the drifting bodies of soldiers lost in the crossing. HMS Broadsword, a Royal Navy destroyer, sliced through the waves nearby, its deck teeming with weary sailors keeping watch for any stragglers or counterattacks. The air still smelled of cordite and brine. Colonel Gerhard Stahl sat inside a makeshift prisoner camp, his uniform soaked, his boots caked with mud. He stared at the rain-streaked tent flap, jaw clenched. The once flawless precision of the invasion had collapsed into chaos. Operation Sea Lion was intended to shock and overwhelm. Instead, it had met a nation that refused to kneel. British resolve, far from crumbling, had ignited with every paratrooper that hit the ground. Lieutenant Rachel Moore stood outside the field hospital, her coat flapping in the wind, hands tucked behind her back. Inside, her men were being treated for wounds, some minor, others grave. Her own arm was in a sling. The bullet had torn clean through, but she hadn't flinched. There had been no time. As she listened to the moans of the wounded and the rhythmic ticking of a nearby field radio, she felt the strange stillness of aftermath settle in. They had pushed the enemy back, but the price was heavy. Tom Hargreaves wandered through the charred ruins of the village square. The church's steeple had taken a direct hit from artillery. Likely German mortar fire aimed at a British machine gun nest. Now it leaned like a drunk, jagged and scarred. He knelt to pick up a shell casing still warm. He had no rank, no recognition, but the villagers now nodded to him as one of their own. He had become something different in these few terrible days, not quite a soldier, but certainly no longer a child. Elsewhere in England, word of the failed invasion spread fast. Churchill's address to the House of Commons echoed across radios and through village halls. "We shall fight them on the beaches. We shall fight them in the fields. We shall never surrender." His voice, gravelly and determined, lit a fire beneath a nation still uncertain of its future. Mothers wept for their sons. Children held tighter to their fathers. And across the Channel, Hitler seethed in disbelief. The High Command in Berlin convened in tight, anxious sessions. The plan had been bold, but boldness was not enough. The Luftwaffe had failed to control the skies. The Kriegsmarine had been no match for the Royal Navy. And worst of all, British morale had only hardened. A second attempt, it was whispered, would be suicide. Colonel Stahl, now under British guard, gave his final field report. In terse, clipped German, he admitted the operation had been naive übermütig, naively overconfident. He had underestimated the will of civilians to fight. He had misjudged the terrain, the fog, the unpredictability of an island that seemed to repel every footfall with ancient fury. Lieutenant Moore returned to her family home 2 weeks later. The curtains were drawn, the garden untended. Her father, once skeptical of her commission, stood at the door, eyes wet, arms open. She allowed herself one tear, then another. The war was far from over, but this battle, this invasion, had been turned back. Tom sat atop a barn roof overlooking the coast. He could see the outlines of distant ships, friendly ones now, patrolling like silent sentinels. He had stolen a map from a fallen German soldier, traced its lines every night, trying to understand what they had planned. Even in victory, he wanted to know more, why men came to conquer and why others rose to stop them. In London, the Ministry of Information began crafting the official story. Films were commissioned, posters printed. A nation had faced its darkest day and had not fallen. For once, propaganda needed no embellishment. Reality had provided all the courage and drama necessary. Colonel Stahl was eventually transferred to a high-security POW facility. His eyes lost none of their sharpness, but the stiffness in his posture began to ease. He spent long hours writing, translating military terms into English, trying to understand a people who had defied everything he had been told. He received one letter from home, a single line from his wife. Live, come back, change. Lieutenant Moore returned to active service, promoted for her actions. Her voice now carried a gravity her men respected without question. She no longer doubted herself. In war, clarity came not through orders, but through action. Tom volunteered for messenger duty, delivering communiques between villages, learning routes by heart, evading stray patrols and downed aircraft. He had become something of a legend, the boy with the bicycle and the iron will. One day, a British officer pressed a medal into his palm and said, "For bravery." Tom simply nodded. He had already understood what courage meant. By year's end, the scars of Operation Sea Lion remained: burned fields, buried men,